I've seen students very confused about, when to register for the exam, which exam term to opt for. And they're kind of hasty and they want a one-word answer, but it does not work that way. So there's a lecture when to register for your exam. You need to see that. You need to understand, the duration of classes, the duration of self-preparation, etc. That is one. In fact, I ended up creating like an exam calculator or something where you can just input the number of hours you can study on a weekday, weekend, and let's say a 20-25 days revision time that is needed, and it will tell you when you could take the exam. So make use of it and take an informed decision. So I always recommend all the students to make sure that they register in the early bird deadline where the fees is the lowest for the institute's registration. It does not make sense to shell out that kind of money unless you just have a lot of money to waste and your planning is such that you might be able to save some time and you can afford it. Then it's fine. Then absolutely that's fine. And also what happens is, if you're not sure in terms of whether you'll be able to prepare for, let's say, an August attempt or a November attempt or something, then a very simple idea is that you start studying, you wait until maybe early bird registration deadline, and then depending on the kind of content you have covered, the proportion of syllabus you have covered, you can simply decide that, in the remaining time frame, whether you'll be able to complete and take the exam in that November month or not. So accordingly, register for November or the next term. Right? And do not stretch to the last date of the deadline, because in case there is a credit card issue or there is some issue with respect to registration or something, so always target 4-5 days before the exam registration deadline, but always register in the early bird. So with respect to passports, it's a funny story. Actually not funny, I get very annoyed with this. I'll tell you what. So firstly, when you're registering for the exam, you need to have a passport before registering for the exam, not just before the exam date, because when you're creating a profile, etc., you'll have to put your passport number. On the date of registration as well, your passport has to be a valid passport. So you cannot register for the exam with an expired passport. And on the exam day, the passport has to be valid. I have seen students, forgetting to take the passport to the exam center. In fact, there was one student I remember particularly, his passport was in the visa office, and 2 days before the exam, he's calling in the first class also that please make sure that you do not, even if you're planning a holiday after your exam, your passport is with you on the exam day, and it has to be a non-expired passport. So for example, I'm registering today in the month of May for an exam in November, and my passport expires in July. I can register today because today my passport is valid, but I have to make sure that the moment I register for the exam, I get my passport validity extended, so that on the exam day, the passport has to be valid. And before the exam day, please make sure that you're changing and updating. I've seen some students having this query, particularly the working professionals and all. So there is a question on the institute's website that if you have been barred from holding stocks or something like that in terms of legal violation and all of that. So that is only applicable in terms of, any kind of violation and all that you've done, and because of that you cannot hold a stock. Working professional, and because of your job description or your role, you have access to inside information, etc. And you have restrictions on trading because of your job role, then in that case you have not violated anything, so you do not have to mark that yes, I have violated. No, you have not violated in that case. So I get this question quite very often. Also make sure that when you're answering these questions with respect to violations and all, be very clear. He did not violate anything, there was no problem with his profile and all that, but by mistake he answered something incorrectly, and because of that obviously his application was withheld, and then he had to do a lot of to and fro with the institute. So be very, very careful when you're filling in these forms and all, and otherwise you can just go through the registration details and all that. Do the registrations properly. Don't take it lightly. People take things very casually and very lightly. Be very focused and serious when you're doing all these registrations. So normally your payment modes are credit cards and wire transfer and all of that, but credit cards seem to be the cheapest. Out of that, I think Neo Global was giving some good offer and all that. They give you online debit card and that also works. Some debit cards work, but mostly credit cards work. A lot of times I've seen students having a problem that their credit card limit is, let's say, 50,000 rupees and the payment is 80,000 rupees. So in that case, it's not an issue. For most credit cards, if you can just, pay 50,000 in advance in your credit card, your available credit limit becomes 1 lakh rupees, and then you make a transaction. And then you will be able to make a 80,000 rupees worth transaction also. You prepay in the credit card 50,000, so your credit limit becomes 1 lakh rupees. 99% I would assume that for all the credit cards, this trick should work. DCB bank option, you can just ping the coordinator and get the details of that. You can use a debit card or an NEFT kind of a transaction for making payment to the institute's website through that. So they will guide you with that. You can just ping them and they'll give you the details about it. But wire transfer is generally an expensive option, and I would not advise you to go for it. So now when you're looking at the CFA exams, level 1 and level 2 has a 18% GST applied to it. Level 3 does not have GST. Taking the exam from India, you will have to pay GST. Let me give you a clarification over here. It's not about taking the exam while in India. So for example, if you've registered with an address in a US or a UK or a Gulf or something, so you might be registering from a US address but taking the exam in India. So your registration address would be different and your exam center could be anywhere across the world, it does not matter. Exam center does not attract the GST charges, the registration location attracts the GST charge. So say for example, if you're living with your sister or your parents or somebody outside India, you can give that address outside India. You will not have the GST applied to your exam fee and you can take the exam in India. You can choose the center anywhere across the world. So the idea is that wherever you register for your CFA exams, while registering whatever is the location you put, if it's in India for level 1 and 2, 18% GST is applicable. If you're outside India, it is not applicable. The exam center does not decide whether 18% will be applicable or not. So only if you are staying or if you have your address in a country outside India where you're living maybe with your siblings or your parents or something, then you can give that address and you may be taking the exam in that location or you may be taking the exam in India. The exam location does not matter. What matters is the address which you put when you're registering for the exam for the institute.